King's Quest 1. Although not initially known as King's Quest 1, it was just initially known as King's Quest, and initially released in 1984, re-released about 3 years later, and then up with a, well, it had its subtitle then, and it was then remade in 1990 with a different game engine. And this is actually the first of the King's Quest series, which should be obvious. But it was made by Sierra. And it pretty much, I would say, started a whole sort of a revolution in game design and helped put Sierra on the map for its time. Now, in this game, you play as Sir Graham, who was summoned by King Edward to retrieve 3 magical treasures. A magic shield that would always protect. A treasure chest that would never run out of gold. And a magic mirror that would allow you to see into the future. Now, this game also was designed to have many ways, well, multiple ways of completing tasks. And also had a lot of, the series would have a lot of inspiration from fairy tales and Grimm stories. Brother Grimm stories. And, there was some open-endedness to it, or you could claim the 3 treasures in any order. And the trick is, though, with one of those treasures, if you go after it and you don't have everything you need, you're pretty much soft-locked, as they would call it. It wasn't, quote, intentional, but it could happen. And this became a notorious thing in Sierra games, that you could actually enter a section of the game without everything you need, and you'd be soft-locked into not being able to complete it. And Sierra also designed this so that you could take a less violent route. And what I mean by that is you could play the game and not kill any monsters or enemies. It should also be noted that this game did have enemies. In the initial release, they were limited to 1 screen. Hence, a lot of players would use the edge of the screen trick to traverse once they figured out those areas. The SCI remake, using Sierra's Creative Interpreter, I believe is what that stands for, expanded some of these foes to have like 3 screens that they roam about in. And some of those overlapped. I mean, you had a, quote, thieving dwarf who would steal some of your treasures, and you'd never get them back. Which, again, if he steals one of the magic treasures, you're soft-locked into not being able to complete the game. You have a sorcerer who will freeze you in place. and you have an ogre. I think even a wolf is supposed to show up in some scenes, unless that was just added for the remake. I'm pulling a blank on that one. You have a dragon guarding the magic mirror. You have a giant Holt carrying the magic chest, and you have the shield in the Kingdom of the Leprechaun. And you were given, you got more points if you chose non-violent actions. For example, if you greet an elf, he will give you a ring that will make you, quote, invisible. So when you're facing the giant, if he sees you, he's automatically going to come over and stomp on you. But if you're invisible, you can actually wear him out. You can wait him out, and he will eventually fall asleep, and you can take the treasure chest. Conversely, you could use the slingshot that you find up there with some pebbles you found back on Earth, or back on in Daventry on one shoreline, and use a slingshot to kill him, a la David and Goliath. You get more points if you just let him fall asleep. And like any good game, it also had some puzzles in it, including one of the most devious puzzles, which involves Rumpelstiltskin. Now, when the game was first designed, they wanted to be very clever about it. And a note in the witch's cabin, the witch's gingerbread house. Yes, it's a gingerbread house. Has the clue you need if you can interpret it right. It says sometimes it helps to think backwards. Now, of course, in the Rumpelstiltskin, you have 3 chances to guess his name. And once you start that, you have to guess his name. And of course, if you say Rumpelstiltskin, that's close. I think later releases allowed that. Future updates allowed it. Also allowed for you to spell his name backwards. But the actual solution to it was to reverse the alphabet and spell his name out with the reverse alphabet. So, like, R was like, the corresponding letter from the front of the alphabet. So T is like the 20th letter. S is the 19th, so R would be the 18th, and working from the back, that's about 9 letters in, I think. Yeah. So instead of R, you'd have an I as the first letter. The U would become E, because... No, it would be V. My bad. E would become V, or U would become... No. U would become F. And so forth. Making this like one of the most difficult puzzles of the time. I would not be surprised if Sierra got many calls about that one on their hint line. And yes, this was in the days before the internet was commonplace everywhere. But that was a notorious puzzle. Now, in later installments of the game, they set things up so that while you could get the chest and the shield, you could get the chest and the mirror in any order. You always had to get the shield last. I think this was to, prevent more soft locking, because almost everything, once you get on the island where you can access the land of the leprechauns, it's a one-way trip. So you can't go back, which is also why the adage, Sierra really started the adage of save early, save often. That's where it got more well known, since word processors weren't overly big yet, and even those you couldn't do multiple saves of something in a sensible way. Of course, as you claim the three treasures and all that, once you claim all the three treasures, you win the game. Well, you have to return to the king and show that I did it. And I have to note here that they did make sure you showed respect. I mean, you have to bow to the king. And of course, one of the trickiest things in the game was actually getting into the castle just at the beginning of the game. Because you had to go in to the castle. You started outside the castle. So you have to cross a small bridge to get past the moat. Where there was, well, in the original, it looked like crocodiles, but they were like sea monsters or moat monsters. So, that was actually where a lot of people would die in early games. Now, I've played this many times over the years, and I will admit the first time I played it, I got a bit frustrated with it. But I had figured my way through most of it, even had a map that I sort of put together on index cards. That is long gone and long lost. But it did show that if you thought things out and explored, you could do well. And even now, to this day, I could complete the game in about an hour. Maybe a little more. And, it's one of those, the more you play, the more plan things out. I even played it for an unfair gaming challenge, which you can actually check that out. That's a full run, and I played it to minimize those risky sections. And Sierra loved to put these sections in that you save, or you have to be very careful. They liked putting one of those in a lot of their games in the early days. And should you guess the gnome's name and you get the magic beans, you have to climb up a beanstalk, which is tricky and is key for the save early, save often. Of course, if you're doing what they call that unfair gaming challenge, you can't save. Not unless a game is known to crash. But like I said, there's easy ways. They try to set up so even if you screw up one part of a puzzle, like with the gnome's name, you still have an alternative. And no doubt, if you were able to, in the original, get the shield before you get anything else, you probably could use that while you're fighting the dragon. Probably. I never tried, because I went with the non-violent route of getting a bucket of water and throwing getting the bucket from the well, which is how you get in the dragon's cave, having it full of water and throwing it at the dragon is like, how embarrassing, my flame is out. And with the giant, I could do either, the slingshot or wait him out if I remembered the right way, which when I did my playthrough, I didn't fully remember the right way with that, well, when I did my unfair one. See, they try to minimize the chances of failure because you can't solve a puzzle. And that even includes the troll bridge. But of course, there you could die in the game. I mean, what's the game without a risk of death? But it was actually a very good entry, a very fine start to the franchise. And when a game is as short as, on the relatively short side like King's Quest, it's hard to put a lot to it. However, I will say this in finality of this, is that during its re-releases, they finally gave the witch a name and set up story-wise that she was your main antagonist, which is why in a lot of related material, like the novels and the book and the companions to the series, she is referenced as Dahlia. But that's all I'm going to say about this particular entry. I hope you do check out the channel and check all the videos out that I have up on the channel. I mean, it could take some time, but please do so. And until next time, this is Rich Kale here on YouTube, Rich Gen X elsewhere. Bye all!